come here from England today, yesterday. I work for Deutsche Bank, and I'm with my colleague Laura Grau.
I come from Valencia, not so far,
Yes.
but I also came yesterday.
Okay.
I'm working with EFT, and we've been collaborating for a while with John
3 or 4 years now, yeah.
in the Deutsche Bank project, and we came here to talk about our experience.
Okay. What we intend to sort of cover today, right, is how we got started on the Agile journey within DB. And I work within a part of DB, and first of all, it's worth describing as well possibly a little bit more about me. I'm a program manager. I'm not an Agile coach. I'm not an Agile evangelist, actually, in any way, shape, or form. My job in the bank, I'm paid to deliver transformation and change, right, that the bank needs to undertake as part of its vision and what it wants to do.
And I'm paid to help you.
Yes, that's right. That's right. We have a very good relationship between me and Laura. So what we want to do is how we got started on the Agile journey, the challenges we faced over the course of the years, and why we chose SAFE as a framework. And to be honest, this isn't about specifically SAFE per se as such, but I think it's about the journey that we went on and some of our decision criteria. The obstacles that we came across over that period. I think one of the key things I'd like people to take away today is what those obstacles are and some of the things we did to overcome them, because many people we're seeing a lot of the same sort of problems coming across different parts of the organization at different places. And then talk about what went well and what question and answers we've got. Okay. So if we start back, basically the area that we're talking about within Deutsche Bank is the P&L area, right? Basically, back in 2008 when we faced the credit crunch and the banking crisis, there was a lot of noise in the marketplace, right? It generated about sort of how the banks articulate how they've done well and what the profitability is and how they represent and manage their risk associated to that. What we've been clear is that we hadn't really been investing in things like the profit and loss in the back end in the way that we should have been. So it was a clear deficiency over a number of years. So there was a clear need to do something about that and to put in place a better suite of applications, a better P&L representation within the organisation, such that we could better represent what our P&L was. So what happened is we had a couple of failed attempts prior to 2012, but essentially in 2012 we essentially started a kick-off. We started with a small Agile team based in London, primarily, to kick off the strategic
But that time everyone was co-located. They were all in London, in the same room. They were working together, same language. They were assembling the architecture of that new P&L tool. So there was a lot of energy. People was happy. They were working together. That was going well.
Through 2013, right, we achieved what many would call our MVP, which we got our minimal viable product in place. We had an initial release across a small volume of the business, across a small piece of functionality that had some intrinsic value associated to it, right? But we were starting to see that to fully deliver on what this program of work and this what we needed to do for the business, we needed to expand. So we needed to grow, and we needed to expand through our typical delivery centers. We had delivery centers around the world.
And in fact, someone said, we should be like a Spotify. And at that moment, we were in a period of getting more people in there, getting used to what Scrum means, getting used to those agilities. But even though we were still happy, we were still in a mood of, we think we can make it happen.
Okay. So we had a sort of good year. So we went into 2014, and basically we had a great year. From a business perspective, from a delivery perspective, we basically onboarded 17 businesses. We were really starting to establish what we could do. That we had critical mass. We had a large team now in place, right? And certainly from out of the top 10 projects within DB, we spent 600 million a year on IT in DB. And we were one of the top 10 projects, and we were the only green top 10 project because we were delivering. We were actually meeting the commitments that we were expected to do, right? But we were starting to see growing strains.
Eso no era verdad. That was not the reality. Behind the scenes, we were kind of chaotic. We were disordered. We were not organized. There were 8 teams by that time, and each team was going their way, using their own ceremonies. They were not connected. The stakeholders, although finally they saw the final results being delivered, release by release, they were not sure what was coming into that package. They don't receive the visibility from the teams. So we felt that there was this connection, that there was going to be some kind of chaos arriving quite soon.
Yeah, I mean, one respect, I think we use the phrase, we were kind of a victim of our own success, right? Because we had been delivering, but as I say, we were descending into a degree of chaos. And when we looked into 2015, right, I would say the good thing was we did have the confidence, and I think Chris talked this morning about the confidence of your stakeholders, that we did have the confidence of our stakeholders that we could deliver, but we knew we needed to do something differently. And when we looked at 2015, we saw some real challenges. First of all, I think from the business's perspective, because we were now critical mass, we were a big piece of the organization, that basically we needed to, one, expand the business that we were doing. So we needed to continue across what we were doing. So we need to roll it out across the rest of the bank, which is a phenomenal piece of work to sort of complete that. On top of that, basically there was a big drive for cost reduction. So basically associated areas started to become prevalent, and we needed to work with those areas, and we needed to bring those into the scope. So the scope of the application, what the product could do, needed to expand. We needed to become more aware of the bigger, broader landscape that we operated within the bank. I mean, we were sort of, we're talking about a £30 million program within a bank that spends 600 million. We're now a big player within that. So we needed to work alongside those other places. And the bank has its 2020, what we call its 2020 plan, which is about costs being streamlined. It's about meeting what the regulators tell us what we have to do. So it's a very demanding piece.
Same time, we had lots of trouble with our operational perspective.
Which is what
we had different locations. We were distributed teams working in London, Barcelona, Kiev, Pune. We had to go in India. We realized that we had inconsistent methods. So when we were sitting together, we realized that not everyone was understanding the same things of where we wanted to go. We also saw that the knowledge was different in different vendors, in the different locations. There were specialists on some areas, on some others there weren't. So we were in that kind of mode of we need to react to this.
On top of that, I mean, as anyone who works within a big organization, you have what the business wants you to do, and then you have the transformation that IT is doing as well. So one of the things that we've been asked to do is transform our delivery model. So I've been asked to expand within our delivery center in Pune as one of the expansions that we need to do. And it's like, how do we retain the delivery model that we've actually got with that in place? On top of that, there was other teams that we needed to engage with that didn't necessarily operate in the same way that we operated, and we couldn't force them to operate in the way that we wanted them to work. So how do we engage with those teams? And they're big initiatives. These were huge initiatives. They have a €150 million program on sort of regulatory reporting. How do we interface to that? We have a 50 million program that works around our market risk operation. How do we actually engage with that part of the operation and sort of link up and sync up with what's happening there? So there's a lot of initiatives that sort of we have to fit within the corporate world, that when we were quite narrowly focused, we didn't have to. But when we were bigger, we did need to. So that gave us probably a bunch of management problems, right? Because in fairness, at the end of 2014, basically, money wasn't the issue. Basically, people were throwing money at us, right? Because they wanted us to do lots of different things. Things that we were beginning to feel that we couldn't cope with, that we couldn't deal with, right? We had a very complex business environment. So the business can be very siloed. It was basically throwing demand at us in a very, very silo-based way, which meant that we were now having to compete with competing business priorities. So how do we deal with that? Right? And then we had finite delivery capacity that we had to sort of work under. So we had to work under particular constraints of only so much capacity to do. So that was beginning to sort of, if you like, mean that we were looking in 2015 thinking we have some real issues that we need to address and face. So what we did is we said, well, what do we need to do? Well, first of all, we want something lean and agile because we've been delivering on that for 2 years now, right? That's gained our customers' confidence. We're firm believers that that is the right way to do delivery. So we need to make sure that whatever we do, we can't go back to a waterfall or some other sort of rigid, inflexible approach. So we need to sort of scale to what we need to do.
Oops.
My apologies. Wrong button.
You've switched it.
Right. Oops. What we wanted is something that everyone could agree on. I needed to take on board 60 people in Pune. That's 60 new development staff in Pune, and I needed them to basically follow the same process as we had in the UK, and we were having problems making that be cohesive and consistent in the UK and the sort of 6 different geographies we had in the UK. So there was a real challenge. How do we get everybody making sure that it's all working on the same way? We had different vendors. We had to make sure that the vendors were talking in the same language as we were talking in, so everybody had the same view. I couldn't have vendors coming in talking about something differently. We wanted a common vocabulary, right? Many times I think that we'd seen issues where we said one thing and it means something differently in somewhere else. And that can happen between England and the US. It's not a language translation, but it's almost like a cultural interpretation of actually what and how you behave and what's actually said. So we needed a common vocabulary. We needed something that was a framework, that was enterprise level thinking. We couldn't just do this in the team. We couldn't solve this at the program or the project level, at the team level. We couldn't do that. Resonates with what Chris was saying this morning. You need to look at the overall framework to get all those elements in place because it just won't work otherwise, right? Because we were growing and scaling at an enterprise level. That was certainly the case. It needed to work alongside other initiatives and transformations, and acknowledges that multiple priorities and budgets exist, which is again is another dimension of the whole program piece, as how your finances work alongside that. So, and most importantly, I think what we did know is that we developed over 2 years a very good delivery capacity and a very knowledgeable delivery teams. And we wanted to tap into that. So whatever we did, we didn't want to be dictatorial and take that away. So we wanted to have something that has the teams managing, self-organizing themselves, that is evolving and growing. We fundamentally believe, and that comes back effectively to the lean and agile piece at the beginning, which is we tap into the fundamental capacity of the delivery teams and the people that you've actually got. So what did we do, right? Well, first of all, you need to be decisive. And I think the first thing I did as a program manager was basically make sure that I had a cohesive leadership team that was very clear on what it wanted to do. And let me just put this, how do I put this politely? You need to make sure that that leadership team is in place because you end up deliberating and pontificating or debating about what it is that you're going to do, right? And you spend too much time. So you need a decisive leadership team that can make decisions, that has control. And it's fundamental, and we'll come back to this, it's fundamental to actually being able to implement a framework approach. If you don't get the buy-in from top to bottom, then it's not going to work, right? We chose SAFE because we chose something that was essentially off the shelf that we could refer to. Something that basically that we could go around the world and say, this is what we're going to follow. Not something bespoke. If it's bespoke, I'm going to have to explain it to you. If it's off the shelf, if it's clear, then we have a framework that we can all point to and we can train people on and we can get people accredited on. And we want to make sure that, as I say, it's a framework, so we put enterprise value at the top of the piece. So we had to do what was best for the organisation. And we could always justify that, but that's sometimes conflicting where you get lots of different business priorities coming in at one time. I needed commitment. We needed to get our stakeholders to commit to this framework approach. So we needed to make sure that they were buying into that sort of top to bottom. So our Epic owners, our Epic stakeholders, that basically they were behind what it was that we were talking about. So we weren't translating what we were doing and then misinterpreting. They were misunderstanding what we were trying to do. We committed to move to feature teams. We'd evolved, as scale evolved, and Laura will touch more on this, we'd essentially become more component teams. We needed to move to a more feature team based, which is basically have a more common dialogue with our stakeholders on what it is that's actually delivered. And we needed to make sure that we had a common, consistent understanding of how we were doing things across the different spaces. So we trained all of our people in India, all our 60 people, all were trained, right, on SAFe. We had SAFe consultants in place. We had coaching staff in place in every single region. Our vendors committed to do the same thing, so that every location we have the same commitment and understanding, right? So the debate became less of a debate and more about a sort of what are the behaviours that we're actually talking to. We'll touch more upon that in a few minutes. And we needed to work on an improvement process. We needed to work out our backlog grooming process. And we're going to talk more about that because I think it's kind of a key point that we've learned over the time as to how you can refine your backlog grooming process across the piece. What we also did is, because we were debating less about the process, because this is how we do these things, and less about what are your roles and responsibilities, because those were very clear, and we laid those down very clearly at the beginning of the process, because we're following a consistent framework. We took a program of coaching and improvement, which is basically where are we seeing behaviours not being consistent with what we expect and not resulting in the outcomes that we expect, right? So that we can coach and get people to understand where are the pinch points, where are the misunderstandings, where are people not quite getting it, right? So that they can understand what they can do. Qualifications into vendors and contracts, making sure that the vendors came with us on that particular journey, I think was kind of key as well. So where did we find the obstacles? This is safe. As I said, this is, I'm not going to stand here, right, and articulate the value of SAFe versus another methodology. This was a matter of choosing one that I think we could agree on, that this met the criteria that we were looking at. But where did we find the obstacles? One of the big ones we saw is that typically, and this would probably be, if you look within Chris's presentation this morning, and he talked about the portfolio level and the program level, what you typically find within big organizations is that you will find a senior executive, might be a director, who is charged with a particular budget, say it might be given 3, 4, 5 million euros to deliver a significant income, right, resolve a regulatory burden that needs to be actually done with a specific time frame that needs to be achieved. That is an epic owner from a perspective, but that is usually a program manager, someone like me, right, that basically has a task to deliver on something, right, and they selflessly aim for that. They selflessly think about what it is that they need to do to achieve that. And what they often do, what we found, is that when we moved to the delivery teams, right, basically the feature teams, basically to say, you're not going to get a particular team, you're going to get an amount of the delivery capacity that the teams are producing to resolve your particular piece, based upon its relative priority to other particular programs of work. So you are not going to get a team. Right? Now then, in the first version of this in SAFe, when it was implementation, this caused a lot of noise because it was like, how do our stakeholders, how does our epic owner have transparency that what they want to be delivered is being delivered? So we established something called brand owners, which basically helped in one, bring down the requirements and the demand from the epic owners, and disseminate that across the teams and across the various product owners, but also act as an aggregation point to bring back what the delivery teams are doing, what the feature teams are doing, and feed that back up to the brand owners so that the brand owners had accountability for what they did. Without that, basically we were cutting off some very senior people, our epic owners, who were basically fighting us. And sometimes that's where you often see, I think, the conflict in big organizations, because these guys want to see something they can wrap their hands around. And bringing them into a position where they felt they had accountability in the team and commitment from the team, and that they were getting a clear transparency of what they needed to do was kind of key, right, to sort of put that in place. So we created these brand owners that would do that. And a lot of what the brand owners do often is they work out a lot of the optionality. We talked about that this morning, I think, what Chris talked about. A lot of the optionality was resolved in that particular space.
On the team side, as we've mentioned, we also had some problems, and we had made some commitments. We had committed to move to feature teams, but we were coming from a component thing based, and our technical landscape was not easy neither. We had around 40 modules, Java, Oracle, Informatica Power Center, all of them interacting with dependencies, auto-generated dependencies, manual dependencies. So it was not easy to couple with that. And now think that we are moving to feature teams. So you have, at that point, around 80 developers who are now allowed, or not even allowed, but requested to work on all the modules at the same time because they are not delivering this way, they are delivering in features. How do you ensure that you are not breaking your rules, that each of the components evolves on the same way, that the patterns that are applied in all the teams follow the same rules? I'm not saying that we are strict, but that we follow the same patterns. So we defined the component guardian role, and it's a role because it was not always one person, could be 2 to 3. It was sometimes a group of people, and they were responsible of getting that integrity across a component or a group of components through all the teams. So they belonged to a team, but they had a separate hat. They were component guardians of module A, and they were responsible of getting that horizontal integrity across all the teams. That worked quite well, and as we keep on adding more modules or even removing modules, these guys remain in there, these people, and they have been growing as communities of knowledge of each of those components. So that's the way we kind of remove that technology integrity constraint that we knew that we were coming to. Another one that we found were scalability blockers. We quite soon react to the fact that we had, as Jon has been commented, we had to support multiple business onboarding in parallel. We had to, as per management directives, we had to grow the team in India with 60 people this year. And at the same time, going back, we had to move from that component side view to feature teams. So all that at the same time, we took some actions. And this is just to tell you some minor ideas of what we did. In terms of how we supported the environments for providing those business onboarded, in the DevOps space, we specialized a team on environment management. What they gave them is the opportunity to suggest improvements, to put in place new procedures, and to couple with, I think we were talking about 15 to 20 non-production environments, but prod-like environments. So they really made improvements on that area. About the new joiners. Think about, we need to onboard people in India. New joiners, blank. They come with no idea. Some of them even with no idea of Scrum. Some of them, some principles of Agile. So what we did is each of the new joiners was accommodated to an existing team. And with that, we were able to couple with the bit of Agile principles, Scrum ceremonies, because the team trained them on that. But they also needed to be trained on the product, on what we were doing, technically, functionally. So I think key for success there was that the program sponsorized the fact that the training was needed. And the training as such was created as an epic, and it was prioritized in the backlog for several product increments. So how this worked is basically each team in each product increment was allowed to spend a capacity at some points for training, giving or receiving training. And the fact that with SAFE we were doing the product increment planning, where everyone was exposing what they are doing, at that time we were able to see the needs, we were able to see the dependencies. So it was easy to identify how the training was being completed. But the other piece is, at the same time, you don't need to train them only on small bits, but also you need to remove the specialist side that you had when you were working at component level. Now those specialists, you have them spread in different feature teams. So in this team, you have a specialist on function A, and in this one, you have a specialist on function B. But you want all the teams to be able to go to the same backlog and pull a feature, whichever is the feature. So you want to get to that point. So what we did was those specialists, those SMEs, we pulled them out of the teams. For a period of time, and it was 3 to 6 months, we got them with a simple mission of remove yourself as bottleneck for the program. So make these teams aware of what you know. So, of course, you will always be the specialist. You've been there for 2 years, 3 years. You know more than what they will learn now. But make yourself redundant. Make the fact that you are a specialist not a bottleneck for the program. And it was like that. In 3 to 6 months, depending on the SME area, these guys went back to the teams. And the way we saw that this was working is because all the teams were able to get features from the backlog at some point in those 6 months.
Thanks, Laura. We mentioned earlier about the backlog grooming, which is kind of key, and I think it's probably worth just a little bit of explaining what we mean by backlog grooming and how that fits in with planning and what you actually commit to your stakeholders. So essentially what we've said is we have epic owners, we have multiple budget owners that basically come to us, all of them with a particular driver of what they want to do. The first thing we needed to do is, within each of those contexts, is we took the program increment planning basis, which for us was 4 two-week sprints, and basically broke the year up. And we knew what capacity we could deliver within the program increments. And then basically we took the epics and we used a variety of different techniques, which I won't necessarily drop into now. But what we did is we're essentially trying to give focus into our program increments as to what we should focus in on. The point here is it was really trying to say the things that we are not going to focus on now. This isn't about trying to make a commitment to what can be done when. This isn't about wishful thinking, planning. This is about basically saying what are the most important things that we can do and what is going to dominate our capacity, certainly for the next 2 months, to deliver upon, that we need to deliver upon. So let's focus on delivering that and what we need to do, and then determine in the next program increment what would be the things we should be focusing in on then. So it's a macro level planning that is trying to sort of apportion. But as I say, I stress, this is about saying we're not going to focus on that because it isn't something we're going to deal with in the company. We have enough to deal with, right, in solving these problems to do that. So we're going to look at that problem here. Or if something else shuffles it back, we move it back. And we determine what goes into a program increment based on sort of our sort of macro level, like planning poker type estimations that we made upon our effort based on our sort of total amount of capacity that we could actually deliver. So we could then plan out what we think we could do for the year. What was amazing about this is we tried this a variety of different ways. We'd use spreadsheets and all sorts of different ways to try and talk to a business, but visualizing this on sort of what we call our epic planning board, and then actually say there's a finite capacity in a program increment within this 2-month period for us. Basically, the business got immediately what it would take, because they could basically say, well, if that's the case, then they started moving the post-its around the board themselves. Right, very quickly this became almost not an IT thing, because they started to talk about how long what the options they could do. They would say, well, okay, that is a really important thing, but I can live with something else for the next 6 months. I'm prepared to move that one backwards, but this one I can't live without. I have very little optionality in this, and I need this to be done really importantly and put that on the board. We did use something called shortest weighted job first. It's a really useful technique of sort of trying to get granularity into that, because it's just making sure that we saw flow, which is what we wanted to see, which is a kind of important technique. We then went on to, if you've apportioned what you're doing by your program increments, then we can foresee what's coming up in the foreseeable program increments. What that means is we can use a Kanban to basically, which we call product owners board, which is where we resolve a lot of the optionality. Here we have a need, something we need to be able to do. We need to get a resolution to it in the next program increment. Therefore, in the prelude to that program increment, we need to work out what are the options that we have available to us that we can work through. What are the solutions that we've got potentially available to us? So the architect would sit within that team as well. The product owners would sit within that team to basically work out all the optionality, what we could do. The intention is that at the end of this piece, we have a clear, groomed backlog. That is something that a development team can pick up and work on. The optionality has been figured out. We've gone through that sort of process. This is what we want the team to build, right? And because it's really important that if you don't run through this process and you're entering into the program increment or your scrum periods with too much optionality, the team can't resolve it because there's business optionality within that, there's architectural optionality within that. Those need to be resolved before you ask a team to go solve it, right? So that was what we were looking to do. We're not talking about removing every requirement. It's not about this isn't about waterfall thinking. This is about removing what the options are. How do we want to solve this? And what are the different ways that we can actually solve this? Because then you get your classic programming increment planning. So we did our big room planning basically against a grim set of backlog. So we stopped wasting time, right, on optionality and making decisions. Well, we don't know whether this is going to be the case. We don't know whether this team is going to be in place. So this is where we started to engage with other teams as well. Because this is where we resolved, where we have other big initiatives in place. Well, this other big initiative is wanting us to do something in this, so it needs to be resolved, right? Have they determined what it is that they want us to deliver? Have we got a clear indication of that? If the case is no, then we're not going to do that work. We're not going to enter into the work just because you want it, because we haven't worked out what you want us to do. So we're not going to put it on the backlog. And that gives us a very robust program position to kick back at sort of where things are just not ready, and if you like, wishes getting in front of capability. So that was how we sort of like worked that through. And that took us a little while to get there, but it does map out how do you give your stakeholders a better representation. And the great part of this is we track this with metrics all the way through. We know within a program increment what we get because we know what we typically can deliver within a sprint. And feature teams deliver features. They don't deliver components of features. They deliver something that's granular, there's something that we can see. And we can calculate that on a program increment. So we know what we think we can deliver. We know what our capacity is, right? We're sitting at the top level with basically a view as to what we think is required, and we start with a macro level estimate. Here we can resolve those pieces. So the amount of times that you would take a requirement that we say, well, that's a sort of a medium T-shirt size piece of functionality, then we get to here, and it may prove to be a big piece of functionality when they first look at it. But if we understand that it's a medium and it needs to be solved within that time, well, what can we do? What options do we have to bring it back down to the level that we can do something about it? Or are we prepared to sort of move it out and say, it really is a large, therefore let's figure out what we can do per programming increment to get it in place. But typically, that's where you sort of make a lot of those value-based decisions about what can and can't be done, and you fit within that. So basically, this gives a clear view between the story points here, which we could tell our business what we could deliver, and then what we were actually delivering. So it was very, very clear supply and demand trajectory there.
So we have chosen only some of the obstacles. Of course, there were more.
Okay.
And some of the options or solutions that we applied to show you. But if we go back to the timeline that we were presenting at the very beginning, by 2014, we were a bit lost. Yeah, we were one of the top whatever projects in the bank, but we were a bit lost. And the disorder word in there is really what happened behind the scenes, as we were saying before.
It is probably fair to say that I think we were probably critical of ourselves, but yeah, in some respects, disorder comes through growth, right? And you know, if you throw a whole bunch, if I'm asked to recruit 60-odd people into Pune, right, to support what I do, if I'm asked to onboard a team of 20 people in Ukraine to do our testing, then disorder, we may get value out of it, we will do a very good job, but disorder naturally occurs. It is a natural consequence that we need to sort of work through. I think it's just the evolution.
And with all those challenges in 2015, with the business priorities, with the directives for management of growing, with our internal commitments, with all the other functions that John was commenting that we had to interact with, somehow, with all those things that we've presented in there, summarized, we did it. And we got aligned. So by 2015, we removed some barriers. We removed things like we are in different locations. We removed things like we are different vendors. We created really a team spirit on the whole area. And we recovered our stakeholders' confidence. We recovered our own confidence of being able to deliver things. We deliver things on time, again. And really, we found that maybe not Spotify, but that we were somehow prepared for scaling. So 2016 could be an opportunity for scaling.
Do you have an idea, you know, as a program manager, right, what I look at now, right, is that we have 10 feature teams of about 14 people, 13 people per team. Each feature team is capable of doing what every other feature team is doing. It's balanced. There is a mechanism for calibrating knowledge, so I don't have one team that is more better for something than another team. I don't have an A team and a B team. I have 10 teams that are all capable of the same functionality. That means I can calibrate what their output is, right? So I've got we can split them geographically. We can split them non-geographically. We don't need to assemble the teams in that way. But sometimes if they're based geographically, it can help because it removes some of the issues. We can then compare and contrast on the metrics on what the volume of output that we expect is. And if we go back to our planning piece, that's fundamental to understand because, for instance, if I know that I deliver 1,800 story points in one program increment across the team, across 10 teams, that's 180 story points. Across 10 teams, that's 18 story points per team, right? Which is how many per sprint. So I know what they should be delivering in that sprint. Now then you can say, well, John, you've got to be careful with those sort of metrics. And that's very true. But the piece is we are trying to get the granularity. We are trying to sort of see that sort of evolution. But what this is pointing us to is if we're seeing discrepancies, outliers from that, that's where the coaching comes in. That's where the behaviours come in. And that we weren't talking about you're doing the wrong thing or they're not. They don't understand the process because they all do. It's typically behaviours. It's Scrum Masters and product owners and developers that haven't quite got something. And what they need is the coaching just to help them to sort of overcome those impediments. Or if there's a blocker of some kind, understanding what that is. And it's very, very evenly focused. So as a delivery manager, it levels the playing field. It makes it much easier for us to understand where things are not working as they should be and then go fix them and help the teams achieve what they need to do. But often the teams, we have our inspected adapts, we have our retrospectives as you'd expect, and that's where those sort of pieces are coming from. But it does allow us a bottom line to sort of figure out exactly what's going on and sort of get to sort of what are some very, very hard to achieve behaviour changes, right? That often are impediments to delivery.
Yep.
So what went well? Basically, because we groomed that backlog, right? Because we basically were delivering only those things that were at the right pace, that we were able, and we also didn't have epic owners that had their own dedicated teams, which I think is often the way that often organisations develop. That basically we delivered a capacity back to the epic owners. What made sure is we always delivered what was the best thing for the bank. So one of the examples I would give is that we had one particular initiative which basically had come down as a top-level initiative. It was a £150 million initiative. We had some significant piece of that to do. It was slow to get off the ground, as often these things are. They had budget allocated to do that. So they were basically taking about a third of our capacity to be able to do that. But what we found through the first program increment, they had nothing that could put on the backlog because they hadn't evolved their thinking. But the teams continued on building, right, only the important things. And that was a little bit of a concern because it's like, well, where's my team? My team's been sent off. It's like, well, look, you don't have a team, you have a capacity, and you don't have capacity to develop against. So basically, you're not getting anything done. But when it actually came and the requirements did come through, we could actually put 70, 80% of the team's capacity against that initiative. And then the stakeholders, the epic owners, started to say what the value was, is that basically, if theirs was the important thing to be done, it would get done. Because we would, if that was more important than everything else, then we would move it to that piece. And that was better than having 20% of the capacity of the team. Because typically, they would have been 2 months behind. Or actually, as it turned out, 4 months behind because they went through 2 PIs without doing anything. So they began to understand that actually the value of actually having capacity rather than dedicated teams. We could basically present as well the demand and supply to our stakeholders, and be that in IT or be that within the business, they very clearly understood what we're capable of delivering, what we can deliver, right, and where they sat within that. And that basically there was a good debate, so the value was getting delivered as best as we could. I think, as Laura said, we looked at the back end front to back, and we were much more easily picking out where we were having scaling impediments, things that were stopping us scale, and be that sort of knowledge, be that technology, be that particular skill set. We were much more easily able to focus in on that. And things that would be very, very difficult for us to get to, I think we managed to get to quite quickly. We branded all the teams. One of the things, we took a slide out here, but we had all the teams that have took the names of Magneto and Iceman and various other names. And the teams got a real identity. There are about 12 people, 13 people per team. And they've got a real identity behind what they do. And absolutely tapped into them. There's become a real pride. You'd think the whole metrics, the managing the scorecards, we held that back because we didn't want that to become an abuse of their thinking. We wanted them to sort of figure out what they needed to do. But they wanted to know themselves. They wanted to know how they were doing in comparison to the teams.
In fact, we were happier.
Yes.
And that's why I'm here, for example, because we kind of removed that barrier and we started to feel that we were teams, we had our identity, we were able to add value, and we were helping, because that's what I'm getting paid for, helping the organization to grow on that bit. So we, in reality, we were happier as a team, as persons working in the team.
So yeah, as I said, long-term longevity is what we're after here, long-term and delivery capability, and that's I think what we got. I think the teams are much more sustainable, I think is the word I'm looking for. A sustainable growth within what we do, a sustainable delivery capacity, and a much more linear view of how we're enabling change within the organisation.
And because we have the red card there,
right?
My summary, and with all those, I mean, we can talk about stories, experiences, other ideas of what we did, but really what made the difference, or what was the change from the previous years, or even other projects where I've been working on, was that we had a sponsor. John was sponsoring this. So we had someone that said, we are going to do this, and I'm going to stick to what I've said. And we also had a leadership team reduced, because till 2015, there had been many voices in there have been many opinions, all of them valid opinions, all of them good ideas, but different and not going to a single point. So when we really had the sponsor, and when we had the leadership team established, it's at that moment is when we started to flow as a program.
Yeah, I think, and resonating as well, I think with what Chris had mentioned earlier, is that I think, one, it's a leadership team that's cohesive and strong in the decision making that it can put in place. And I think, as much as anything else, that what's the word I'm looking for? Having that sort of coordinated leadership, I think is kind of key, so that they can really pin down on the issues, and it's without that starting block, it's one of the things I see as a real impediment to sort of moving forward. Is if there's too much debate, and often it's where we deliberate too long and too much in the leadership team, and we're not making the committed decisions. That's where we see the sort of the failures actually happening. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's
all.
I think it's where we are. So.
Okay. Not sure if we have time for questions. If anyone.
Yeah. You're talking about capacity throughout the presentation. I mean, if I'm a project manager, as you say, in charge of 3-4 million euros, how do you deal with? I mean, how do you translate from my budget to the capacity available? Right.
Basically, what we know is we know at any particular point, right, that the team has a particular cost associated to it. So our delivery team. So I'm a program manager in charge of a capability, a delivery piece. We know that is funded typically by a number of key initiatives that need to be done. Epics at a sort of more senior level, because in fairness, you don't get to play the game unless you arrive with budget. And effectively, that is where we first of all map out the fact that if we've got, say, 30 million, right, in budget, right, now I can actually say that, like, our global valuations group are paying about 13 million, which is about a third, right, of actually what our budget was. The P&L group, central point group, was paying about a third, and then we had our marker risk control and model valuations group that was paying about a third of the budget as well. So that was their budget that we typically got. What they normally do is they will put a program transformation manager in place that's responsible for delivering on that initiative, and then we take that money and sort of put that in a team. Traditionally, they would have expected to almost like have had a team that sits underneath that. What we said is basically we have 30-odd million of actually delivery capability that we've got. This is what our team costs. 13 million is what you're putting in. You're getting approximately a third of our development capacity. So if we deliver 1,800 story points, you're getting 600 story points, and you can prioritize within that. If you don't get the backlog, then you don't even get that, right? Which is what we've seen where people were putting the budget forward. But we sort of allocate that percentage out. What was interesting is the program manager that typically was charged with actually doing that was the one that had the most problems with it, because they felt they were just getting capacity, they weren't getting a team, which is what they felt more comfortable with. We said, no, you're getting only capacity what the team will deliver. When we expressed this to stakeholders, they got 100%. They had no problems with it whatsoever. They just came back to us and said, great, that's all we want. I'm paying my 13 million, you're going to deliver these outcomes of this, right? Or this is what you're working towards, these outcomes, right? This is what we're aiming to achieve. Yes, that's good. So they were happy with that representation. Yeah.
Thanks for
yeah.
speech. And question is about scaling, about some figures. I mean,
You have the mic right there.
Right.
sorry. My question was about how many people finally was or is now working.
Yeah, we haven't said that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we
as I say, the development teams, delivery teams, feature teams, right? There's about 140 people in those teams.
But the whole program, because it was not only the development teams, the whole program, I think it was around 220.
No, it's about 250, 260.
250.
When you bring in SMEs and change transformation.
We haven't
as well.
shown here, for example, but we had to do a lot of exercise of understanding the roles and the behavior on those roles, and that.
And that's across the world, as you said.
Yes.
And so you only have that board that you have shown with the epics and only
For
on
the
one side, right?
yeah.
Say again?
So
The
you are
epic.
using just the board you have showed is in one side. So how do you manage that
Right.
across the world so everybody's aware of?
The Epic Owners Board, right? Now then, what I didn't articulate, just for simplicity purposes, is we can have more than one Epic Owners Board, right? That's meant to prioritize within a particular Epic, right? So we know that there's an amount of capacity that sits within that. So we have a macro level capacity at 600 story points per PI. That would be one Epic Owners. We get them to prioritize within them. But then we can cross-prioritize between the different PIs. Because if we determine that one PI needs more capacity to achieve its deliverables, then we can go forsake things from other pieces.
In terms of where they are based, those are world-based boards. Those are in London.
Yes.
The program, the program manager, the product manager and the product owners, all of them are based in London.
Yeah.
The teams are distributed, but the product owners are right now are in London. And the teams, the board really with the team work for the product PI. That one is using Jira.
Yeah.
So we use Jira for that.
We do big run planning. I think one of the points I think you might be getting to is that we've looked at trying to, if you like, put on make international what our programming and planning board is, right? And we've struggled with that. We've used version 1, we've used Rally, we've looked at all those different products to do that. And certainly when it comes to the big room planning and your programming increment board, right, the board is easily the most effective way. And the way that we make that work is basically we video camera the board, we video camera the teams, and then we basically cluster our teams, making sure they get together in the different regions to make sure that they work together.
For example, in Spain, although we were distributed for the product increment week, because it became a week, we were all going together to Barcelona, for example, and sharing there some. But the real board was always in London, and we were able to see it video conference.
Because we couldn't realistically move 130 people to London, right, for 2 weeks. It was just, we had to work within the practicalities of that. And what we did find is we did make various attempts to, and we actually did a hackathon where we actually created something that we thought might work. But the problem is you miss the human interaction aspect of the program increment planning. And by clustering the people into rooms, into groups, right, we got the human interaction going, right? And I think if everybody was sat at their desk, looking at their screen, looking at the program increment planning board, we wouldn't have got the dynamism in the program increment planning or the big room planning that we wanted. So that's why we said we kept with the board. That creates the right amount of interaction.
Let's stop.
We have to stop.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.